Guys, thank you for hanging out with us today. Again, this is me and Akal. And we want to say that if you are suffering from any kinds of let's say, porn addiction, excessive masturbation addiction, you cannot move on after a breakup, you have a problem communicating with your partner, you cannot resolve conflict, you don't know anything about sexual energy but you want to know more, and tons and tons and tons of more practices how to ramp up and rekindle your sex life, and so many so many topics actually are covered in both my and Akal's programs. They are two separate courses, but they overlap. They cover so many aspects about relationships and sexual energy. Akal specifically is addressing individual sexual energy cultivation and the creation of sacred sexual practices and tantra. My program is covering sane and sexy relationships, which is conscious dating, practices that has to do with communication, how to work on yourself to be equanimous and to be sane in this crazy world. So we will put links below to both our programs. Please check them out and feel free to contact us on our social handles if you have any questions and if you need any clarification about anything. So let's dive into today's topic. Today's topic is actually about how communities and cultures and society norms shape our sexual and general relationships. Let us put it that way, because people don't put a lot of weighing on traditions and cultures and religions, and now social media and internet and all these play huge roles in shaping our relationships, our expectations. It's a huge topic. We're not gonna cover every single aspect, but we just want to raise awareness. We want you to be aware that whatever you're consuming day in and day out, looking and checking out these Instagram chicks, tits and ass, that if you think that this is not affecting your expectations from your partner, or if you think that is when you're looking for a partner, you're not, this is not at the back of your head. No, it is. Just let me bring it to you. Yes, it is. So actually a call chose kind of like a headline for that topic, which is called, uh correct me if I'm wrong, permissive versus repressive. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, so yeah, so basically what we're kind of alluding to is this idea that there's a pendulum swing, and this pendulum swing, it happens throughout time, right? So
Yeah.
over some period of time, we can see how attitudes in society change and things of that nature. And
Yes.
obviously, change happens faster in some areas of the world, slower in other areas, or whatever it is. But essentially, the pendulum swing within the context of this video is from expressive to repressive, or from permissive to repressive. Um, anyway, yeah, you got it.
So I'm just gonna start here by saying the idea of courting was not super far-fetched in the Western world, guys. Actually, before the democratization of contraception, which is, I think, happened in 1968, people were getting to know each other before the process of having sex or making love. So it was never, hey, we just slept together. So what's your name again? It was never that way.
Yeah.
Never that way. So it was not really something, very far off, in our past. Nope, no. And actually, I mean, I live in Vancouver and I was part of a huge community because it just happens that I had some friends in that community, and it's a Christian community and they are in their 20s. and they still actually court. I mean, literally, I don't think they basically just kiss during all the courting and dating period. And I have a friend who's been in a relationship for 2 years, and she says she's completely abstinent from any sexual activity with her partner until they get married, and they very much believe in that. So it's not something obsolete, it's not happening on Mars, it's happening in Vancouver. So it's not, and these guys are in their 20s, and they are very accomplished, and they are not a part of a cult, and they are not I don't know, there is this Mormons or no, none of that. I don't mean to degrade any group, but what I'm saying is they believe in that and they practice it, so it's not super far-fetched. Also, what I want to say is that I've been exposed to many cultures, many traditional cultures, and I recently had one client who just got out of a very drastic relationship and a divorce, a devastating one. He identifies himself as a Muslim, and or was a Muslim. He's not anymore. I guess he's from Morocco, and because he was a Muslim, he said that he had to, he was waiting for 4 years. He was dating or courting his wife for 4 years before getting married. And I was just telling him, so how does it look like to stay all that long without any sexual activity? What is the drive? What kept you going? And it is, lo and behold, it is this beast, the sexual energy. You know, it's just that this anticipation of what it would be like to be with that woman in one bed one day, and it keeps you going, and it keeps you on tolerating things. Yes, stuff can happen, of course. They would made out, they would kiss once in a while, this. She comes from a conservative family. They come from a conservative society, which is the case in many countries. And I'm currently in Turkey, and so many parts in Turkey, although Turkey is well, I would say a liberal country to an extent, but they are still a traditional society, and you would see so many, especially if they are practicing Muslims and women wearing the veil. You would see them, you would know that they are dating these men, which they are walking together on the street, maybe holding hands, but most of them they would wait and not have a sexual encounter until actually they get married, which is, I talk to them personally, and this is the general belief and the general norm and the general expectations too. So why do people do that? Why do they can keep going and going? It means that it's not impossible. It means that it's not unheard of. And
Mhm.
actually what happens is, men say sometimes that with the particular case of this guy from Morocco, and I was just like, you're a young dude, you're like 32. How could you stay in a relationship for 4 years without expressing your sexual, and he was also loyal to her. He did not cheat on her, he did not go behind her back, he did not go with a sex worker. So he was saying that it's this love I had for her because we cultivated other angles and other parts of the relationship. We were not hyper focused on the sexual aspect. And that made the bond grow stronger, the emotional bond, the mental bond, all these kind of bonds. It didn't mean that the relationship was successful at the end. Okay. It did not mean that. And sometimes these very long courting periods end up in divorce after 3 or 6 months because the expectations fail the image they drew for, like they over romanticize the relationship and the utopia and the sexual expectations. And sometimes when they even go into the sexual aspect, although the chemistry was good before, sometimes it fails them in action. It happens sometimes. So it's just, what I'm saying is, it's part of persevering in the relationship is abstaining from the sexual component sometimes helps because it strengthens other bonds And that is why when you see, like, I love this guy, Aaron Apke. I don't know if you follow him. He's a spiritual teacher. And I love what he shares personally about when he dates, he always takes his time, that he takes his time in dating to establish bonds, to establish emotional bonds with the partner before establishing a sexual bond, because it makes the relationship, it just builds connection. It builds connection, which is a sign of maturity, which is a sign of high level of consciousness, I would say. So yeah, that's my 5 pennies on the topic for now.
Yeah, those are some good points. And you brought up some of the advantages that exist within. So we started using the words conservative and liberal. And I want to say that these terms are, in this context, they're exclusive of politics. We're not talking about political disposition or leanings. So I'm going to use those terms as well. Conservative is within the context of, I'm saying, and again, we're going to look at these things at the
Reserved or traditional, I would say, in cases of Turkey or Morocco or other like
right.
Islamic countries.
So the idea of conserve is to slow down, right? Liberal is this idea of accelerating change. So you get change too quickly, you get disaster, you get chaos. If you have too much, if everything is slowed down too much, then you halt progress, right? So there's disadvantages to either the extremes, of course. So the idea here is that there is a pendulum swing happening, and we have this. You can look at the sexual liberation period. You brought up contraception in the late 60s, for instance, as a huge piece of the sexual liberation movement. Osho Rajneesh talks a little bit about that in some of his books. But the idea here is that with this pendulum swing, it's nice to, like, I'm close to 50 now, and what's really nice is that I can look at kind of both sides to some extent. I grew up Catholic, and I grew up within that faith, and so I was exposed to some of the more, I would say, conservative or repressive aspects. Now, what I want to kind of look at here is I want to look at institutional power versus individual power. And this is something that, if you're a fan of astrology, you look at the eighth house. The eighth house is interesting because the eighth house, in a lot of ways, it talks about going into the occult or going into that which is hidden. And the process, and so what they talk about with the eighth house is a lot of times is power struggles and power dynamics. So power struggles and power dynamics exist when we're being superficial. They exist between individuals. They can exist between institutions. They can exist within cultures, right? So the word cult, right? Cult means to cultivate. And you can think about it, even like if I'm making yogurt, I have to make a culture. So it's a community of bacteria, which allows me to make that culture, right? So keep in mind that word is significant. So the pendulum swing, as I have observed, which is repressive energy. So when sexual energy is repressed, it serves an institution. And I'm going to talk about religion. Religion, having dominated the world for a very long time, created a lot of repressive energy around that. So in other words, it created a bad guy of sexual expression. You only have sex if you want to reproduce, right? So they created a lot of attitudes and a lot of judgments and storylines. And again, I think that's negative. However, the current situation, which is the chaos of permissiveness, sexual permissiveness, you got pornography, you've got this thing, that thing. People have no moral guidelines whatsoever. So what does that lead to? That leads to chaos and confusion. That leads to men discharging their energy. That leads to the disconnect from the sacred aspect of sexual practice. It leads to poor connections between individuals, higher divorce rates, all these kinds of things. So this idea that one side is better than the other is nonsense. Because here's the reality. Institutional power controls pornography. Institutional power, just the same, whether it's form of government or corporations, is the same, exactly the same outcome as religious control and power. And again, it's always about power and control. So what's the choice here? The choice is, what Amir and I are offering, as well as a lot of other people out in the world offering very specific programs for individual empowerment. And that's what this really is. This is about individual empowerment as it relates to relationships. It's about individual empowerment as it relates to sexual energy. Because without the individual empowerment, you're stuck in the cult. That could be conservative religious cult. That can be liberal, overly permissive cult. The problem is that it leads to disruptions and distortions in the flow of sexual energy. Those individuals who are sensitive to the flow of energy within the I, within the individual, will see that, oh, if I am overly permissive, what happens? I get caught in my head. I get caught up and I want to do this, I want to do that, I want to do all these different sexual things. In other words, I'm not centered. And if I get caught up in, let's say, the overly moralizing, that's not the word I want to use, but anyway, the overly restrictive or repressive aspect of, let's say, religion, then what ends up happening is it blocks and distorts the sexual energy too. So is there one better than the other? No. Again, this is kind of going back to the eighth house in astrology. Eighth house in astrology, what it's encouraging the individual to do is to recognize their conditioning through going into things at depth, psychology, astrology, all these different things. So the individual can recognize the source of true power. The source of true power lies in one's connection to spirit. Spirit, I don't mean this in a religious context, is simply this energy which animates all existence. Yeah, it's the spark. It's this life force which is flowing through us. Call it prana, call it chi, call it whatever you want. The problem is if the individual is identified with a culture, then what ends up happening is they're either repressing or overly expressing that form of energy, and they're not in alignment with their soul, with their spirit, in terms of their own individual sexual expression. And again, for a lot of individuals who say have alternative sexual lifestyles, the alphabet groups, we'll call them the alphabet groups, then what ends up happening is that, those particular groups aren't accepted within, let's say, the sort of conservative religious cult. So they identify with this other cult. The problem is the other cult is overly permissive and it's wasteful of the energy. And again, it doesn't mean it has to be like that, but because humans like to polarize, they say, oh, this side is better than that side, so they negate something. Just as you described earlier, there's huge benefits to taking your time. There's huge benefits to having some morality. There's huge benefits to having guidelines, because what it does is it allows that connection to build between partners. So then when they go into the sexual dynamic, anyway, they're much more sensitive to a lot of the sort of nuance, right? And they didn't race to get there, right? And the other thing is you can take your time. So before you dive into some sexual dynamic, do you like the way the person smells, right? So you're going to get warning signs that you can honor in advance if you slow it down. So in other words, but at the same time, like if I'm a gay man and, then the whole conservative aspect doesn't work for me because they tell me I'm going to burn in hell or whatever it is. Well, that doesn't work either. So that creates all sorts of distortion. So the bad guy in I would call it permissive culture, the bad guy is shame and guilt, right?
Yeah.
So shame and guilt's the bad guy there. But the funny thing is shame and guilt exists in the other side as well too. But that's kind of the issue here is how does the individual avoid shame and guilt? How does the individual avoid wasting the energy? How does the individual then also cultivate greater connections, greater depth, greater richness of one's sexual life? And so that requires that they recognize their conditioning. And that's all.
Yeah, and also thank you. That is so very much spot on. And I want to wrap up quickly with that.
Mhm.
It's the power of knowledge and the power of choice will set you free. In other hand, in other words, knowledge will set you free. When you realize that you have a choice, you are free. You're not stuck. And simply put, this is what we actually strive to offer through our knowledge, our own personal journey, our experience with people and helping people and clients. And that is why we are actually excited about sharing these programs with you guys, because it's not just a mumbo jumbo thing, because it's all over the place, but it's from real experience, from real exposure. And we want people, we want to empower people. This is an investment that you do in yourself, you know, that you need to empower yourself. You need to have access to this knowledge, which is very ancient but still very valid and contemporary. And really, knowledge sets you free, because you know, oh, I'm not stuck, I have a choice, and there is a way to reconcile both. And so, again, thank you for hanging out with us. And again, please share this knowledge, because we want to raise awareness. We want people to know about this kind of information, because we believe it's valuable, and we believe that many people need to wake up to this and need to wake up to the beauty of sexual energy. We're not prudes, far from it. But we want people to be conscious how beautiful sexual energy is, and how to use it consciously, and how not to be played around, uh, you know, with all these like pornography and excessive over sexualization that can destroy actually your sex life. Having said that, thank you so much again, and check out our programs. It's the links are below. Appreciate you, Akal. Thank you for being here,
Thank you, Amira.
and see you next week.
See you then.
See you. Bye bye.